So just as a reminder, I'm recording so that you are aware that the recording has started. Okay, so we're gonna start off today with a piece of pastel paper and some compressed charcoal. And what we're gonna work on today is building our awareness of how to work with these materials, in such a way that we can have a relationship with them that is more than just functional, is actually a relationship that we know how to use and manipulate the materials to be successful. So, functional, in my opinion, is like you can kind of get it to do something you kind of want. Successful is knowing how to manipulate and use the material so that it's doing exactly what you want versus kind of getting close. Okay, so let me find my little boundary box here so I know how much space I have to draw within. And I'm just using a larger piece of charcoal paper, so it's easier, for y'all to see, and then also easier for me to reach with around all the recording equipment. All right, so the thing that we've already kind of discovered a little bit with the eggs, I think, is that the compressed charcoal has a capacity to go super, super dark. So when we're starting out a drawing with the compressed charcoal and only the compressed charcoal, then immediately we start to get into a situation where we have to really consider, how do I make a whole drawing with a tool you previously said was basically the hottest chili in the curry? And so the thing that I would say here is that what we have to learn is, just like with the pencil, I just thought, I don't think there is chili in curry. Pardon me. They say the hottest chili pepper in the chili, I guess. I just like thinking back on the times I've made curry, and I'm like, you don't put chili peppers in curry, silly. So, we've explained this idea that this is like a really drastic and highly contrasty and very strong material. So let's talk about, like, how do we make it not so strong? Well, the answer, of course, is going to be like, where do you hold the tool? So you can see I'm using like one of my whole sticks. So this is going to be easier if you have a whole stick. And when I hold the tool, the angle that I hold the tool, and also the amount of pressure I put onto the tool. So along the top of your page, go ahead and let's just start off with the lightest possible value you can create. And then I want you to just push harder. You can see I'm pushing harder and going back over areas, and start to really layer in the darkness. Now, you're going to get to a place where you're pushing and you're going to go, oh, if I push any harder, this thing's going to break. So at that point, you can come down. And then when you want something really dark, you can just get really close to the end of that nib, the tip. And so what we want to try to do here is to create a transitionary value from light to dark. Now we can see in that sort of transitionary space, right, that like there is a sense of gradation. And that gradation is created through the utilization of not just the material in terms of the material we're pushing, the charcoal pushing onto the surface, but also the surface itself. So this appears lighter because there is more paper showing through, so it's quantitative in that way. And this appears darker because there's less paper showing through and there's more charcoal, so again, it's quantitative. So it's either the quantity of paper that is visible or the quantity of charcoal that has been put down that is going to affect the way that we read this thing as either light or dark. Okay. Now, one of the biggest reasons why I gave you that long lecture about materiality was because I want us to pay really close attention to the way that materials inform us. So, when I make an etching and I'm drawing into an etching plate with a stylus, and it's a metal stylus against metal etching plate, that informs the line that I make. When I'm making a lithograph and I draw onto a stone with a greasy pencil, that informs the type of drawing I'll make. When I'm making a painting and it's paintbrush on canvas, that informs the type of drawing I'll make, painting that I'll make. So the material, that we utilize deeply affects that which we are creating. So when we are using materials, we want to think really, really heavily about the ways in which materials are helping or hindering our ability to successfully complete a work of art. And so like when we are looking at deciding what, what are we going to create and how are we going to create it, we want to think a lot about what type of materials we're going to employ. So like here are two brushes, right, from my brush set down here. These two brushes would greatly affect a painting. The difference in their shape will affect the type of mark that I make. This is a flat, this is a filbert. Okay, but also their material. This is a pretty soft synthetic brush. This is a natural brush. Okay, and so this is going to leave more sort of marks than this one. Also their length. The fact that this is shorter means that the amount of paint that I push around with this will react differently to my brush stroke than this one, which is longer. Whoops, I'm looking through the camera. So this one that's longer, I'll make a lot more smoother blended brush strokes. This one that's shorter, I'll leave a lot more texture and a lot more information. So when you decide to make something, you have to think about all these things because they all inform each other. So let's just take our tool and let's start off with just creating something which utilizes a range of values that we can play with and employ in a drawing. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and divide the space with a nice light line. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tool now again. I'm going to go back over that line with the side of my tool. And then down here, I'm just going to start to go back and forth. And what's going to happen is if the charcoal is new, you should get some differences in the way that the charcoal is laying down on the surface. So by that, I mean like the charcoal is new in my case, but I see to be getting like these darker lines from the top and the bottom. and the center is not picking up or applying charcoal quite the same as the tip, the tip on each end is. So when we look at the space now that we just filled with the this value and some texture, it's still very open because there's not a lot of charcoal that's down. What I want to do now with you is go back here, and we're just going to pull vertical lines up. Do what you want. Okay, something like that. Nice and easy. I don't want you to imagine this being anything. It's nothing. It's just marks on a piece of paper. Okay. Now, I did that with my tool this way. So what I want to do now is I'm going to take my tool again, and I'm going to drag it downwards and just mimic what you did before. You're creating a mirror image. So it's like a heartbeat. We're going to do the same thing we did down here, up here, but instead, we're going to be moving along this way, like this, and then as we come down, getting lighter. And draw right over those marks you made until you get towards the center. Now, I really like watching Bob Ross. And we're going to talk about this again when we get to your emotional landscape. But like the thing that is wonderful about Bob Ross is that he draws and he paints using a mass-based system. So this is a mass-based system where we're not worried about edges. We're worried about value as form. Value as area. Okay. This is more like real life. If I want to paint a forest, the worst thing I could possibly do would be to try to paint every single tree. If I did, it's going to look highly stylistic. It's going to flatten out, and it's not going to look like a forest. It's going to look like a group of symbols in a bunch on a surface. What we're thinking about with mass is we're thinking about Gestalt. Okay. And Gestalt being this German, it's German design, it began as philosophy, then turned into psychiatry, turned into design and art. Gestalt is basically like, how do you see a group of things from small individual things? And so when you go out onto the water and you take a ferry to Bremerton and you look across the water, you can see waves, but you can also see reflections. And it's like all these different things that are coming together that give you the feeling that you're looking at the surface of this body of water, right? So when you look at groups created from small individual elements, it's the way you group them together that makes it function as a whole, a unified whole. So we're starting to kind of like imply in this Bob Ross style that there's some trees and a reflection, there's some water, there's some type of light source, and then some sky. So right now, it's very open. And what we need to do is figure out how we're going to manipulate it. So this is where the discussion about Seurat comes in, which is this idea that I have, which is, I believe, completely wrong and completely right. The idea is this statement of drawing without drawing. And I don't mean that like Seurat never put material to paper. What I mean is that Seurat created form and area, created mass without sometimes completely defining for us what that form and mass was. And so we're going to practice that a little bit because as you saw, you're going to be recreating some Seurat drawings as a way to start to understand this process of material application. So let's begin over here on the right. And so not right on the line that you started with, but a little bit above that. Start to manipulate your tool to enhance some areas. What does manipulation mean? I'm doing this kind of like scrabbly, scratchy movement. And right now I'm not thinking too much about light source, but my light source is here. So these darker places I'm working on will become the shadows. So make sure that you leave some material on the left side of them to indicate that those are the sides facing the light source on the left. Okay, they can get lighter as they go back because of atmospheric perspective and smaller. Now, what I want you to do with that next I'm actually going to start up here, apply some darker values through here. And I'm going to lift up a hair as I go across that line and then down right here, I'm going to go dark. And then I'm not going to follow the exact same sort of like height and width. I'm going to kind of like move to the left and right to break up what that might look like. Same thing here, dark. I'm going to keep my tool on the page, go over that middle line. It's going to get dark. And then get lighter, moving to the left and to the right. So now we're starting to indicate that there is a range of values that are linked directly to the sort of the idea of like foliage, density, riverbank, etc. I'm just going to go through and you're going to do it all the way along. And again, as it gets further back, it can get lighter. Now I'm going to take from this dark side here, the dark side. and I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to drag it over the page. And I'm not really putting down a lot of material, but I'm drawing as I move over to the other side, and then I'm coming down. And now on the left side, I'm going to go darker. Not all the way to the bottom. Same process. Coming through that riverbank, deciding where I want to start that reflection. Okay. And so what we're able to do, I love drawing stuff like this, everybody. This is, as I've said before, your assignments come out of what I'm interested in, just like in any of your classes, like if you're taking a Spanish class, one Spanish class may have a heavy focus on like learning Spanish through music, whereas another one may have a focus on learning Spanish through, pop cinema movies from the 1960s. I don't know. What happens is that our interests as artists, like, if you're in an art class, deeply influence the way that we teach. And so this is actually one of my most favorite ways of drawing. And it's something which, makes me deeply miss Florida. The wildlife and the rivers and lakes of Florida are the best parts of Florida. So here's this moment. Now, we have a very, very open foreground. We have a very condensed middle ground. And then our background, which is like, I would say through here, up through here, is pretty light, okay? So let's enter something in to the foreground a little bit more to break up the space. So take our tool, and I'm just going to kind of do one of these up and down things again, but bend and curve a little bit as I do it. And again, I'm adjusting my pressure as I draw. The great question here with something like this is like, can it be left as marky as that? Sure. But I think it needs to have some value refinement in order to make it function within the space. But we're not going to worry too much more about it right now. We're just going to leave it the way it is. Now, coming through here, take your tool and just go sideways and really put some pressure. And just draw right through that reflection. We're going to worry about breaking up the reflection in a few minutes, but right now we're just kind of like drawing right through. Oops, my easel's collapsing. That's the problem with a collapsible easel, it collapses. Sorry, everyone. Okay, now, like I said, we're not going to worry about this too much right now. And one of the reasons is because we want to draw through things to make sure that they feel like they have a continuation. As it gets further back, you can employ that perspective. Let those lines get closer and closer. Now, every wave is an egg. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see that we're kind of setting up this sort of like transition through space of these waves. If you go back through here, you can actually kind of like enhance this one, and it's going to make it look a lot taller than those ones. And you can even like, if you wanted to do one in here that was a bit more tall than all of them, like something like that. Depending on how choppy the day is at the river or the lake. Okay. Those of you here, how are you doing? All right, so we're starting to build up this sort of like systematic drawing in terms of like the way that we're using like a system of employment of marks to create an effect, which is all drawing is, you know, that's all drawing right there. So let's talk about some things we have to think about. The shadow of the wave has to get darker when it interacts with a shadow that is already present. Because 1 + 1 is 1. Okay, so here we want to push that a little darker and then blend it out. Push it a little darker. Blend it out. Push it a little darker. Blend it out. Do you see how like what I'm feathering, I'm kind of like pushing and then blending, pushing and then blending. Just like with the egg, usually where the land touches the water, there's going to be a shadow line. It can get darker, lighter as it goes back. And just like the egg, you want to blend that out. And again, 1 + 1 is 1. If there's already a shadow, it's going to get darker. Same kind of thing on the other side. Again, as it gets further back, you can go lighter. And then pull down if you want, whichever way feels good. So. You go back down here, pull into here, pull. Let the tool glide over the surface. What do you think this space should look like? Every blade of grass would have highlight, midtone, and shadow. I think we have really hard trees to draw here because it's hard to not make them look symbolic. So you always want to look for the lights and the darks, not their symbolic edge. It's like I always think it's really hard to like paint palm trees because like they're so cheesy if you do them wrong. I feel that way about like the evergreens here, you know, you end up looking like everything was made from like Reese's peanut butter, you know, Christmas tree M&M or whatever, peanut butter cups. Everything looks like a cookie cutter. We want to move away from that for sure. Do you see the way I'm moving my hand? And the trick to drawing this way, the trick to drawing like Thoreau is not seeing like hard divisions of space and pulling your values from one place into another place by drawing right over the other place. Like you're layering material on top of material on top of material. I didn't quite get some of these lines through there. Or I lost them. Okay. So it's my little trick is to like cut the white plastic eraser. And so I don't want you, if you use your white plastic eraser straight on this thing, and you got charcoal in your hands, your eraser is going to all just turn to charcoal. It's nice to cut off a section, even if you don't want to trim it to a point, so that you can use it with charcoal and keep the other like in an okay condition. So then same thing, follow the same idea, but you're going to erase now. And you're not going to erase everything. But for sure, like down through here, down through the center where the light would be coming through strongest, we're going to erase. Maybe it just needs to get lighter back there. Pull straight through the reflection that you made. Pull straight through it. It'll automatically like change its value because when you erase over an area where there is no charcoal, you won't be smudging at all. And when you erase over an area that has charcoal, the charcoal will smudge and it won't let you get as bright. And so like it will naturally, in those areas where you don't have charcoal, it will naturally be easier to get the charcoal removed. And so it will also help to create the idea of interconnected values where you need them. Never draw suns. Okay, never again. Never ever from now on draw a circle and say it's the sun. Prove it to me that it's the sun. Not with a boundary line, but with light. The way that we employ symbolic drawing can really, 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 really hinder us. And so we want to make sure that we don't create something that is a hindrance. Okay, Zach. It's like over here. I could use my eraser and pull straight through here and indicate maybe that there's light coming through here. And it would be like the relationship between the smudging and the erasing. Again, smudging here because there's already charcoal there. And then it's going to erase a little bit and then smudge and then erase and then smudge. And then, if you feel like you took too much off, just apply some more. And the more layers of language you build, the more complicated, this novel is going to be. Over here, you could pull out some highlights. So. Okay, so a little playful drawing there, a little warm-up drawing. And I hope that you got some feeling there for some of the possibilities of the charcoal. So now we're going to move on to the next drawing. All right, so we're going to start another drawing. So you might actually be able to just work on the back of the other pastel sheet you had, or just turn to another sheet. Now, one of the things that I want us to understand here while we're working with this in terms of materiality is the way that the paper is affecting what we're doing, and how the tooth of that paper is kind of coming through and affecting how the charcoal is registering on the page and like sitting on the page, like registering in terms of like the value that we see. It's like registering in our mind, and how it's like physically becoming attached to the page as well. So we're just going to play a little bit here and recognize that there's going to be some ranges of difference in the drawings that we do. Okay, so what we're going to do is just go ahead, and I'm sort of thinking about a certain Seurat drawing here to help us to understand like kind of what we're seeking with the Seurat activity. So take your tool And let's just like block in a shape, and it's gonna be basically like an egg slightly pointing downwards. An egg on its tip like this kind of. And then kind of just like a rectangle we could do. This. Something like that. Now, we don't want to put a dark value everywhere because we want the light of the paper to shine through. Okay, we're going to give the effect that this figure that we're going to create is being lit from the left. So that means that the information on the right is going to be the darkness. Now, I don't want you to draw any lines. I don't want any boundaries. Just want you to think about light versus dark. And you can see, do you see down here on the bottom right where my tool's coming out? You can see the type of movement that I'm making. It's kind of like this like circular scratchy movement. I'm going to put a dark line right here, and I'm going to shade out from that dark line. And along this side here, I'm going to darken this side. A little bit of a curve up there. Pull through. Now it's starting to become the shape of a human figure, but it's not perfect, but that's okay. Like, we're not really worried about that today. We're just worried about, that's why I'm doing this without worrying about like, we haven't covered the figure, we haven't covered proportions. I don't care. We're just exploring material. So just kind of like follow along, do your best. Now again, I'm not really picking my tool up off the page. I'm just drawing with my tool on the page. And you can actually see if I can catch it on the camera. Do you see right there? It's kind of like, so this is all round, right? Pretty round, and then it cuts to here, and you can see how flat the edge of my charcoal is. That's where I'm applying my pressure. Now, this is basically an egg. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and about halfway up, I'm just going to kind of like apply a little bit, like a little bit of darkness. A little bit of darkness, and then come out. This little shadow here is underneath the nose. This little shadow is underneath the mouth. This little shadow is underneath the chin. That's all I'm going to do. There's an unfortunate crease in my paper right there, and it looks like this like crying eyeball. Now this is going to be a hat. Just follow along as best you can. Again, I'm so conscious that we haven't done figures. One of my hopes is to like take the idea of the figure as being this huge, massive fear and just like being like, look, you can make a figure this way. And this is, again, you know, this is like kind of like how we really see. So pull light from here. So again, like I said earlier, this side's gonna go dark. And what we're doing, right? Remember that impressionism? Remember that term was an insult. We're making kind of like, I don't know, in a way, this is kind of like lazy drawing, which I love. This idea. It's drawing without drawing. It's the implication of form, the implication of area. Maybe it's a bit darker in here, but not super dark because that's going to be like the sleeve. We have head, hat, and then this is like blouse or whatever, sleeve there. Now this arm's gonna come down and it's gonna come up nice and light. And then just a little bit of an extension like that to make some type of hand. Even that might be too much. Right? I might have overdone it. I'll take my eraser, erase this away. Achoo. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the side of my little piece of my eraser here, and I'm going to lightly push that into here. And like dissolve any darkness that's there slowly and carefully just by adjusting my pressure. I'm going to come up to where the nose is. I'm going to actually kind of like erase all of that, including the highlight on the nose that I left. And then kind of like brush in to the face with the eraser. This is subtractive drawing, y'all. This is drawing through erasing. And so from now on, we want to think about our eraser not so much as a fixing tool, but as a drawing tool. Kind of an edge there. Go in here now. It's like our, maybe it's not a lady, maybe it's a worker who's had too much absinthe, hanging out. And, bank at the Sen. So it's cool, right? Like what I'm trying to also show you is like, if you understand process, you can let your imagination take you where you want to go. Because what happens with, what happens with becoming comfortable with material is understanding the malleability kind of a Tom Waits character. The malleability of drawing is the place in which drawing proficiency comes from. It's the place in which you start to recognize that you have the ability, that you have the control, that the materials don't control you. And as a result, you have the opportunity to take on this task of replication or investigation or imagination. If you are comfortable with the thing, then as you start to work with that thing, in this case, charcoal, you're able to start the process of advancing your skills. Kind of a little Seurat inspired drawing here then. Okay, now let's see what happens when we take our chamois. Let's see what happens when we take our chamois. Let's just see if we can't change this drawing with our chamois. You might need to turn the drawing over so you don't have this like, visual confusion. From your previous drawing. Which means I have to rearrange everything to use the same area. Okay. Here we go. Take your compressed charcoal, draw an egg. Draw another egg. We're not really going to talk about like portraits or anything, but I just want to show you because some of you will pick drawings to recreate that have faces. I kind of want to just show you some tips and tricks. So I'm going to erase this because I don't need that. Now, generally, we wouldn't start off this dark. It's just that we had that drawing underneath. Sorry, when I move the camera, it's now more difficult for me to reach without stepping in front. So if you took an egg and you drew a line down the middle of the egg, your median line, and you turned it to the left, the space between the median line and this side of the egg would diminish and this side would increase. Same thing, vice versa. If you turn it the other way, this side will decrease, that side will increase, okay? If I have a line this way, which we call a transverse line, and I spin the egg in my hand, as the egg spins, this will increase or decrease based on the location of the egg. So you can actually practice this by taking an egg and drawing on it with a Sharpie and rolling the egg in your hand and making notes. So based on the shape of what we drew here, we can see that if this is going to be a head, then we're seeing some of the side of the cranium through here. Okay, so that tells us that this is going to be turned towards the left. So I'm going to put a line through the middle that way so that I have less space on the left and more space on the right. Now it's pretty even to our eye level. So we're going to go around it this way. Pretty even on the top, pretty even on the bottom. Now the eyes are located halfway up your head from your chin to the top of your head, not from your chin to your hairline. And the way that we would start them with value like this is just going to be with a dark shadow. Now you're going to come down to the space, come down about in this position, could say third, come down about a third, and then just a dark line for underneath the nose. Dark line between the lips, dark line underneath the lip, dark line under the chin. And that's basically what all you need to really imply that there's a face there. And most of the faces in Seurat are implied. They're not actually, rendered to a high level of finish. So in this scenario, our heads turn to the left. So then say that this person was wearing a hat, then we could find the curvature of the hat on the location that we see in the drawing that we're copying. And then what we want to do is figure out where down the side does the brim of the hat come in contact with. Of course, we're seeing more of the right side of the hat and less of the left side of the hat. But in terms of figuring out like where does the hat hit in terms of its relationship to the head, you want to come down this side, down through the cheek and see if you can't figure out where the contour of the hat here comes in contact with that cheek. Okay. Then you could say, okay, we're drawing with mask here, Vaughn, so let's get the mask of the hat in. We don't want this line now. Looks like the right side is lighter, so we can make the right side lighter. See what kind of marks you can make with the eraser through the charcoal. See if they can become helpful. I'm not a hat historian, so this may not be an accurate 18th century or 19th century hat. With hair, I know a lot about hair. I would then value the thin, just like with the eggs. If you have a dark outline, that means the value behind would be darker. You can pull that all the way up until you come to the neck. Neck is going to come up and go behind the ear, connects to your mastoid, runs to your sternum. So it's called the sternomastoid muscle on each side that creates that sort of shape and comes down and interacts with the clavicle notch, which is the top of the sternum between the clavicles. And see, we've created a head, we've created a hat, we've created the neck. We've never actually, like, we didn't draw the neck. We've implied the neck. But the brain says neck. And that's what we need our brains to do when we're thinking about recreating these Seurat drawings. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit here, and we're going to switch to the graphite crayon. Now, the graphite crayon is like a really great tool, and they're really inexpensive. You can actually get them at Bartell's, and they're like less. I think they're about $2 a box for 12 of them. So they're a really great, inexpensive tool. They're really versatile, and I'm really a fan of them. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want to play around with the graphite the same way, kind of experimentationally, kind of, you know, just about exploring the materiality. Okay, so I'm going to take my tool and create an area. There was some charcoal here, so it might not be happy with me.
Are we still using the pastel paper, or are we switching to the mixed media paper?
Yes, please switch to please stay with the pastel paper. I might have to change pieces of paper. It seems a bit rejective because these things, the graphite and the charcoal, are not going to mix well. And I thought maybe it would be clean enough, but I might be wrong. Go ahead and begin by establishing like where you're drawing. So this is my boundary box. And what I want to do is I want to keep the tool basically like on its side at first, like this. And so let's go ahead, just like we just did. I want us to, with the side of the tool, create an egg and create another egg, just like we just did. Now, immediately you're going to see a difference, right? Like the way that the graphite sits on the page versus the charcoal. And that's why we're doing this. Once I've established my two ovals, this one is turning to the right, so we're going to put that median line curving with the egg there. I'm going to close off that side, open up this side. Halfway through, we're going to put a transverse line that rolls around the egg. Divide this space into a third, and a third, and a third. Dark, 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 dark. Pull the light from the right side this time because we pulled it from the left last time. And you should be noticing a difference with how the graphite is sitting on the tooth versus with the charcoal. So the graphite is much harder to force into the tooth. So we're getting a lot more of that tooth of the paper coming through, which is going to give us an effect that looks a bit more similar like the Sirop. So our person in the last one had on a hat. You know, this isn't scientific, you know what I mean? Like this isn't like we created a control, but it's kind of like that. Like we created something using one material. Now let's see what happens when we try to recreate it again with a little bit of a variation and a totally different material. Like what are the differences that we can see happening? So if the light is coming from the right over there, then this side of the hat will be dark. And so now I need to start to maneuver my pencil, my crayon, more towards the tip. I'm going to go back to that kind of like squiggly kind of mark that I was using. Bringing it all the way up to the edge. So it's harder with the graphite to like create like a really smooth transitional drawing. Like we're having to actually create marks. But what I want you to do is I want you to focus on transitioning the values into one another. So can you see my hand? So you can see I'm kind of like scribbling. And while I'm scribbling, y'all, I'm adjusting my pressure. And what I want to do is like kind of eradicate this space. Remember we talked about eradication in the beginning of the quarter. We want the hat to be dark and to transition into the darkness on the face. Again, I know we haven't done faces. I don't really care about, the exactness of your face. I really only care about you changing the manner in which you're thinking about how to create a face. Don't get mad at me. We want to always endorse that idea of experimentation and failure as being okay. It's the only way we're going to get better. Too big, Vaughn. See? Too big. Just fix that. I'm right now with your notes, I'm looking for the way that you are using mark and value to blend space more than accuracy in the portrait. I know your portrait's not going to be accurate. That's okay. I'm not particularly interested in that. What I'm really interested in is having a chance to discover what kind of ways in this case we're using mark to create value. Seurat does that a lot. If you look at the Seurat, oof. So when you're making your studies, y'all, I'm expecting you to copy like Seurat's mark. You're doing 2 in charcoal and 2 in graphite. Because I want you to play with both. That sounds great. If you don't feel comfortable drawing faces, then when you pick your Seurat drawings, maybe don't pick a face. As simple as that. But I do like students to challenge themselves. But remember, the drawings that you're making are mostly about understanding how to draw with the values and the marks rather than how to draw, subject. See, I've gone to a precision grip because I want a little bit of precision in here, but I'm still not drawing with lines. Okay, everybody, so last one. Again, we are trying to recreate the two of the same subjects with two different materials. So let's look at the last one being the landscape. So I'm going to go ahead and section off my area so that I have space to draw in. Yours can just be the back of the last sheet. That graphite's not going to really get everywhere like the charcoal will, you know, so you can just flip it over. So that's my boundary box. I need that so I know where on the camera I can draw within, or where on the paper I can draw within for the camera. So let's just start off, same process as we did with the other landscape. Horizon line, using the side of my tool. And then I could just, you know, my paper here is smaller than my material, so I can kind of just go in here. Apply that. Let's do like a looking across Lake Washington sort of scene, you know. So here is, I don't know if I want to make that Bellevue or if I want to make that Seattle. It doesn't matter. You decide which side. Okay. So the lake. I'm going to apply that value all the way down. Feel the tool on the page, and then go ahead and drop in your darker lines to show waves. Now you'll notice that like the one thing I don't do to show waves is draw a symbolic wave. You only see the wave because the light is hitting the wave, and as the light hits the wave, it creates highlights and shadows. Come through here for some a little bit of a wave action in the front here. It's also going to be darker at the front. It's closer to us. Even if it was like stormy over there, it might be darker, but it would probably be a little bit more gray than dark versus dark at the front. Then we just go back. I'm just gonna decrease the space between my lines and the density of the graphite on those lines. I'm going to come to my land there. This just happens to be an area of Bellevue or Seattle that hasn't been developed yet. So there's not going to be tons of buildings. Okay, so we're just going to build like a little bit of a, whoa, this easel is really not very good. A little bit of a rise in elevation. Maybe that's Newcastle. Newcastle? I always wonder why everything in America is named after England. Okay, now, I mean, the connection's pretty obvious. Okay, but as a Brit, it's always interesting to see what places are named. Okay, so there's our land mass, our little bit of elevation. And then for our clouds, we're just going to use the side again. Let's go ahead and say, okay, our light source is going to be here. Let's bring clouds up to that light source. Now, Lake Washington, this area, you know, is like one of the only places I've seen outside of England where you get these like gorgeous dynamic breaks in the clouds and light streams through and hits the lake. And I just love that. Reminds me of the area of England that my family is from. And you just don't really get that in Florida because the monsoons are very different, a very different style of weather. pattern. So then let's bring in that Servo mark. Activate the space with your mark. Keep your tool on the page. Maybe this could be a little bit more of an elevation through here. Fast, marky kind of drawing. I do want you to try to be conscientious of the application of the material. Of course. So you're look at the Thoreau's and you see that when Thoreau draws that like he uses this mark, but he like makes sure to allow the mark to both create and eradicate form. It both solidifies space and blurs edge. And it's a beautiful thing once you start to really see it. So that your landscape become what you want it to become. And then for class today, you've got 4 drawings to document and turn in. Please turn them in as embedded JPEGs. It's so much more difficult for me when they are documents because I have to download them. And so with the discussions, obviously with the homework, I always want documents. But with the discussions, if you put a document there, I have to download the document, and that really slows down my ability to like give you know, everyone's work the same amount of attention. So please make sure that you just embed them directly into the discussion. So we made 2 charcoal drawings today and 2 graphite drawings. So please add those to the discussion that I will create